I hear a dog.
I know, and this might be a problem for me.
It's all good. Okay, be right back.
Not really. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to 24th Annual Eastside Culture Crawl. I'm Mr. Rosenberg, the Artistic and Executive Director of the Eastside Culture Crawl Society. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are working, living, and creating on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. This is the third and last of our Talking Art conversations on creative resilience, which are moderated by Carlin Yandle. Carlyn is a Vancouver artist who draws on her previous career as a newspaper journalist to engage community. I now turn it over to you to introduce the artists on the panel for Traversing Sensitive Territory.
Thanks, Esther. Yeah, if you've caught the last two nights' talks, you'll have seen that creative expression is directly related to moving out of paralysis in perilous times. And this is the whole kind of undercurrent of this general topic of creative resilience. So I hope that those who are attending are finding it intriguing, but also inspiring. And then those artifacts of creative expression, whether it's painting or digital works or objects, can visually connect with others. And I think it's this connectivity that is also part of resilience. So this is kind of the themes that we've seen so far. And I think we're going to see that again today. Tonight we turn to the topic of traversing sensitive territory. So this is territory that can be physical as well as psychological. And we have three artists here who have vastly different practices, but I think that there's going to be some common ground when it comes to that topic of traversing sensitive territory. And again, if you have any questions for any or all of the artists during this hour, I invite you to hit the Q&A button. I don't know if we call that a button. At some point, and then we'll try to address some of those questions closer to the end of the hour. Yeah. And so now to introduce the featured artists, I'd first like to welcome Bettina Matzkuhn. Bettina uses embroidery and fabric collage to explore personal and broader stories about nature and geography. She traverses the natural surroundings near and far as part of her art practice, including residencies in the Yukon, Saskatchewan, in the Rocky Mountains at the Banff Center, and the Gros Morne National Park in Newfoundland. Bettina holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree and a Master in Liberal Studies from Simon Fraser University. She also works professionally as an arts writer and a lecturer and an educator. and she works out of Eastside Atelier. Next, we have Kat Pino. Kat was born in Calama in the Atacama Desert area of northern Chile. Her family escaped the Pinochet regime, moving to a small town, Saskatchewan, when she was just 8 years old. Kat received her Bachelor of Fine Arts degree at the University of Saskatchewan. Her challenges growing up in this relative isolation sparked her creative expression and a route towards recovery. And we're going to hear a little bit more about that. Kat has been working out of Octopus Studio in Vancouver since 2013. And finally, we have Megan Majewski. Megan's pop surrealist paintings have been shown in prominent galleries internationally and appear widely across social media platforms. Her background is in animation, where she's worked on movies and TV shows, and she's led popular painting technique workshops. These days, she works full-time out of her studio in the Arts Factory in Vancouver. Megan's paintings are playful but foreboding, and they tell stories from her dreams, experiences, and memories, with much of her work focusing on life, death, reincarnation, and storytelling. Did I get that all right?
Yay!
Is there any glaring errors, or you just didn't get me? Good.
All good.
Okay. I'm going to start with Bettina just to get things going. Because I know your work quite well, we both are in that world of hand stitching, embroidering, and found objects. In your more recent travels, you have seen the evidence of the massive increase in backcountry foot traffic since COVID hit. Can you first just talk a little bit about where your travels are and if they've changed at all, your areas of travel since COVID?
I've been going out less, I guess, during the lockdown, I didn't go anywhere. And actually, I would go out at night and walk around the neighborhood with my little dweeby camera and take pictures in the neighborhood at night. But I've only done a few longer hikes this year, so I haven't felt like I've been in the hurly-burly of the increased traffic.
And how do you know that there's all this increased traffic? Because you've mentioned that there's increased foot traffic in these areas since COVID.
Well, it's just media reports, and I know just from people not being able to travel abroad or go farther afield that they're exploring more locally, which is great. I guess I went to Manning Park on a weekday last month to see the larches, and it was a weekday, but it was just absolutely full of people. So, it's great that people want to be there and see it. I guess I just worry about the pressure on the landscape. And locally, I'm actually really thrilled with, how good people are in the backcountry. I was with a friend in Banff National Park, and we went for a fairly short walk and came out with a huge garbage bag full of bottles, cans, garbage, diapers, you name it. And I just feel depressed for days after something like that.
And these are elements that you would not be putting into your work, I think.
No, but I think one of the things I'm trying to approach in my work is how we see the landscape, not just as a backdrop for our selfies, but as a kind of living thing, as a character that you encounter. I've had people say to me, why do you keep doing the same trail over and over? And I say, well, because it's different each time I go out there. So the idea that the landscape is sort of a thing unto itself, it's not just a commodity or a source of raw materials, it's its own thing.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to refer to that that image that we were just looking at that is gone now. Can you talk a little bit about, thank you, can you talk a little bit about this particular piece as a way, just an entry into further discussion?
Well, I've asked friends, I never have an idea fully formed in my head, but I've asked friends to give me old backpacks and camping gear that's really thrashed, and I've taken it apart. I was on the Yukon, the Canadian Wilderness Artist Residency last summer, where we went down the Yukon River in canoes, and I was really aware of how we depended on synthetic gear to keep us warm and dry. And I love being warm and dry. So, you know, I cherish that gear, but at the same time, it's made out of non-renewable things and it doesn't biodegrade. So there's kind of contradiction there that we need this synthetic stuff to go out and enjoy natural places. So I took apart the backpacks and combined elements of them with natural images. So ferns, glaciers, fireweed, all that kind of good stuff.
So this would be embroidered.
The ferns are embroidered, and the brown sort of wing shape, horn shape thing is actually the straps from a backpack, and the I don't know what you'd call it, but like the spine that went down the back of the backpack where it was attached to the frame. It was a really old backpack with a metal frame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it almost reminds me of, like, what's that word? Heraldry? That's not
Yes,
it.
yeah.
Is that heraldry? Yeah.
Like a coat of arms, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just curious, how does the piece itself, is it a matter of taking a piece, rolling it around in your hands, exploring it, or and then working with it, or do you kind of have a preconceived idea? Do you work from sketches and that translate, or what's the process?
I have a pin board in my studio where I just pin things. So this was pinned on the board for quite a long time, and I do a lot of drawings. So I do a lot of really small drawings because there's not as much invested in those, and I feel like I can think through something and I don't have to commit to it. So I like drawing. I'm not good at it, but I like drawing, and I find it a good way to plan something, because embroidery and handwork is so labor intensive that it's not a particularly spontaneous medium. I feel better, maybe it's a control freak thing, but I feel better if I have an idea of what I'm doing before I start in on it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'd like to come back to your work. I just think this might be a great time to show contrast with ways of working. And I'm immediately drawn to Kat's process, where you've said that, and you're working in like a psychological territory largely, but based on a physical journey that I think that was the origins of a lot of your work, is it not? From moving as a child from one nation to another, one culture to another, and then working in process. Can you talk a little bit about your process? You say you don't work with sketches, or you don't pre-plan.
No, I don't pre-plan anything. I work with the rawness. So whatever comes out in that present moment is what comes out. So I'm kind of, it's a two-way communication with the canvas. So I randomly spill paint, I go around it, move it around it. And then I take a pause and I look at it, and I look at it in different angles. And then I find my composition that way. I pull it out. So I never know exactly what's going to come out. Sometimes a painting talks to me and tells me this is what it's about before I even know what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely work more with the psychological and the intuitive part of being creative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of how here's one of your works right now. It reminds me of writers who talk about a character that just wants to come out, as opposed to having a character in their mind and then bringing them out.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about this image that we're looking at right now? This looks abstract, but it looks very much a landscape.
Yeah, it is a landscape, but like my work is always has psychological undertones. So this one is called My Soul Will Find Yours. So this is an experience I had with someone I connected emotionally, spiritually, and chemistry, like all three levels, which I only thought that only happened in movies. So that I never really thought that was actually something that was real. And I did meet someone that we connected in that way. And like, it was like, I would see him as a twin flame, like we're the same soul, but we have opposite strengths and weaknesses. So I would trigger his weakness and he would trigger mine. So the idea of a twin flame is you meet at a point where you're both ready to deal with those really deep things inside of you to evolve. So that relation was never meant to go anywhere. It's just meant to have that experience to evolve in a higher place, and then both walk separate ways, even though however painful it is at the time. It was meant to happen and it was meant to end, but we both really gained a lot from it.
Mm-hmm. So is it fair to say that in viewing this, we're almost going on that journey?
Yeah, so that's what the clouds are for me, like the dark emotions and the light, like finding a balance between the two.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can we go back quite a bit to how you got to this process? You deal specifically in painting, correct?
Well, I don't consider painting, I consider mixed media, because I don't work with just acrylics. I mix materials. Like this one, on the bottom, that's masking tape, and I use Indian ink with acrylics.
Ah. And I'd like to hear a little bit about your personal history as a part of this traversing sensitive territory. When did you start this area of creative expression? You're saying that some of your own very heightened, amplified feelings, I think is the words you used, that became sort of a conduit for your creative expression. When did that kind of hit for you?
Well, I think from a childhood, like being a child and growing up in Saskatchewan, a very isolated place, and not feeling like an outcast, like you don't belong anywhere, and not having a voice to express, not able to say that I'm hurting or I need help. So art was a way to channel it, like the way to speak, to express myself. And that became like a way to communicate to the outside world for myself. And that started at a very young age. So all my work is all about understanding the self, the emotions, the psychological, and I don't pick those subjects, like the canvas tells me, like I work with it and then I recognize it. And like there's one piece I was working on it for my undergrad, and I finished it with the colors were so bright, reds and blues, it was ripping, I was stitching, and not knowing that was a thing. Like I never saw any of that type of work in Saskatchewan. And then my teachers brought me this book of Spanish artists, and they're all working with the same colors. So some kind of like, even like my background was still coming out. Like there's so many psychic connections. And then when we talked about it in a critique, and then it hit me what it was about. It's like, this piece is telling me that I'm not healed yet, that I'm trying to heal, but I'm not. It's telling me I'm not there yet.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating, actually. So the creative expression happens, and then it kind of helps you along on this as you continue on your, I'm going to say journey a lot today because we're saying traversing territory. So just, it's going to come out. I know that word's so overused. So yeah, I can you elaborate actually on some specific elements of your abstract work that connect to those emotions? I'm talking nuts and bolts. You said a little bit about different materials.
Yeah, like the reason I like using different materials, because the materials can also guide the image. Like if I'm not conceptually, but just by being tactical, like it gives me the images. Like I need to explore to find the image, just like I am exploring myself. I have to find ways to keep exploring myself. So I could never just work straight on painting, because I need to explore and find things and constantly evolve and finding new ways to make images without just painting, because that would never work for me. Like, I need to always have a challenge to bring images out with different types of materials.
And I've seen some of your work that's actually have folds in it. That's quite surprising. They seem to be, once I've looked at quite a few of those abstract pieces, I think now I can recognize your specific, something that looks very, I can identify the artist because of those elements. The folds are very interesting, very unique, I would say, and some of the stitching and the folding. So you really are pushing the limits of, or pushing into new territory.
Yeah, and it creates movement, like different types of materials, like especially with the waves, it creates a type of movement. So the work is not flat. It kind of has a life in its own, and that's what I'm trying to show, is like that it kind of coming out rather than hiding it, like what I went through, like always hiding it, but now I'm trying to get it out with like psychological and through material.
And you've also said that it's really the process of the work that's important, not so much the end result. Is that, you still hold on to that one? So how do you assess your work then when you're going to put it in a gallery, put them up for viewing, if that's not as important as the experience that you've gone through?
Well, for me, like the making art, I'm always first. Like the work I do is to fulfill me. And if the work is out there and someone also recognizes it, that's, to me, is enough. Like, that's always been my number one thing with my work, is to do it for me. And then if I let it out and then people connect to it, that's enough.
So is that how you decide which ones you're going to show? So for example, in this gallery view, you decide based on how other people are reacting to the pieces, or how do you?
No, it would be how the story folds. Like if this painting tells a story and I put another one beside it, because they're all following a story and a narrative.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So we can view this image here as a long narration, like a one story. Yeah,
exactly. So they're all like different aspects of the same memory. Like you can have different perspectives of a memory that I have. There's so many different angles. So each piece has its own kind of story, but still part of the puzzle.
That's interesting. I'm going to ask Megan now. This idea of narration through the visual field is really strong for you, and I wondered if you can just kind of share what's your starting point when you're in works that are very narrative.
I guess it depends on the series. I like having a story to my pieces because then it has more to it. So I might add a lot of symbolism that kind of gives hints to the story. I have some pieces that poetry goes with it as well. So it's just kind of, I'm not sure why I'm drawn to stories and storytelling, but I like adding all those little things into my work. So other people might not see the story that I'm saying, but sometimes people kind of create their own as well that they put onto it, which I find fascinating as well. So some examples, like some of these pieces that I have back here were for a series that I was doing that I touched on like life and death and reincarnation. And I used some of the flowers in the pieces to put symbolism into them depending on, I did a lot of research before. So I researched the meanings behind different flowers, either from like Victorian times where people would give bouquets of flowers that would hold secret meanings. And then I also researched the properties of different flowers, and I used some of those meanings. Like some very beautiful flowers can be very poisonous. So even though they're pretty, they have these really dark, you can kind of like a dark story to them as well. And then I also put some flowers in based on my own memories as well. So some flowers hold different memories throughout my life, remind me of certain people. So it's combining all those things to kind of create a story for myself, and people can maybe read into my story or create their own story from my pieces.
So as Kat was saying, it starts with yourself. This is the most important thing is you in this story, and then how it reverberates with other people is the second part of that. So it's not the primary reason that you're working here.
Yeah, I think to create some of your, at least for me, my most personal work and my favorite work, it has personal connection to it.
Yeah. So tell me about the Fire Followers project.
The Fire Followers project. So it's an exhibit that's coming up at the BD Biodiversity Museum. And I'm exploring forest fires. And I'm collaborating with a writer, Sharon Roberts, and she's going to be telling the stories of people revolving around forest fires and communities. And I'm telling the stories of the forests and before and after the fires, and sort of we're hoping to change people's perceptions on forest fires and give voice to the communities and the forests. And these are up right now. There's some images from a research road trip that we went on, and just the places that we went, and really being there and surrounded in these areas. We were both so inspired that we had to create a show on it. So you can see here some forest fires, they're very unhealthy, and they're so devastating that even a few years later, they're really struggling to grow back, and plants are having a hard time growing. And then other areas, it's the new flowers are really feeding off the burnt forest, and they're thriving, and it was just meadows of flowers, and it was so beautiful. So for my pieces, I'm trying to have some of the darkness and the beauty. So I've actually gathered charcoal from the places that I've been, and I've ground it up and made pigment out of it. And I've added those into the paintings. So I'm sort of paying tribute and immortalizing the forests before, and paying tribute to the forests that will feed off of that and grow and become the new forest.
This is quite a departure from your other work, not being figurative.
Yeah.
And so does this feel like a special project, and then you return to your these very wildly popular shared characters, or do you feel like this is the primary way you want to move?
I feel like they're both very much a part of me, and I think I'll be moving, I mean, it could change, but I feel strongly to move towards both directions. But before I started this forest fire artwork, I'd paint in my studio a lot of figurative work and animals and pop surrealism and things like that. And then in my sketchbook, I painted and drew a lot of flowers and nature. And whenever I would go walking or traveling, my sketchbook was full of flowers and plant life and scenery. So from this, it was kind of a perfect way for me to explore this new direction, but I still very much feel drawn to figurative work. So I mean, it's tough being like, I'm going to do everything, but I feel like both of the work is very much me. And even though they're so different, and I thought that it was a completely different, like nowhere near my other work, but several people pointed out to me, they're like, no, look at both of the work. It's different, but it's still the same. You're very still drawn to beauty and darkness and life and death, and you still are drawn to the same colors. It's like, it's still very much you. I'm like, oh, I guess it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can't change who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you might work with what you think are two distinct kinds of work, and then at some point they meld, or you just start to see them, recognize them for, this is me. I do see when I'm looking at the forest, the scorched earth, especially, I'm thinking about your other figures with the gas masks on. And that seems to have some direct correlation to me. Did you, so I just wanted to be clear, when you went into those forests, did you go there first and then come up with this idea to do the project? Or was it part of your research? Didn't catch that.
It was pretty organic how it happened. I think it was just one of the times when I'm drawing flowers and looking up different flowers online, and I saw some flowers that are known to be in forest fires, and I was started to get curious, and I realized that, you know, living in BC, where forest fires are such a part of all of our lives. I mean, we can't get away from it. Even if we're nowhere near it, they still affect us. And I realized I'd never actually been to an area after a forest fire, even though we're surrounded by them. So luckily I was having a trip home to see some family, and my old art teacher, who I'm still in contact with, I was talking to her about it, and she was like, I'll bring you to a forest fire place. And it was actually kind of near where my grandparents lived and where I grew up. So she brought me to this place, and that was kind of like planted the seed, I guess, that I was like, I'm really interested in this. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I'm interested in it. And then I started having a conversation with Sharon, who's the writer, and I'm from the Kootenays and she's from the Okanagan. So we're both very much like forest fires are part of our lives. And when we started to talk about it, we both realized that we're both really interested in this, and it sort of grew, and we thought, well, maybe we should like look into this and see how we feel. So we didn't necessarily have an exhibit in mind. We're like, hey, let's just take a week and go to these places, visit the people, visit the places, see how we feel, see what comes of this. We didn't really have anything in mind because we couldn't really plan anything until we experienced it. So after that week-long road trip, we're like, I think we need to create something. This was so inspiring and so interesting, and we learned so much, especially being more artists, and we don't have a science background or a forestry background. So I felt like us taking what we learned and what we saw and putting it through an artistic lens, I think we thought that we could kind of bring a new conversation to this. So it's sort of from then we're like, hey, where would this exhibit fit? Where could it go? And then we thought, well, maybe like the Biodiversity Museum would be really interesting because they have exhibits there. So then we submitted, and then we got the show. So it's like everything's kind of going together, and it's.
And when did it sort of start, the whole thing? Was it last year? This year? This fire followers.
I think it was in 2018 that we still kind of, it was kind of percolating. We're like, maybe this is an idea.
Right,
and a road trip, and then slowly been building it up. And then it's been this year that it's like full on. All right, we've got we're putting a show up.
And in case anybody forgets about the show, you could just walk out into the world in the end of August, and you'll be reminded that.
Yeah, even earlier.
This is very timely. Yeah, even earlier. Yeah, I'm old enough to remember when there were no forest fires at the end of. Yeah, it's crazy. I'm going to go back to Bettina because, you know, as Megan is talking, I think about how much I know you do so much of your. I don't know if you get inspired by being out there in your travels, or if you view the outdoors as part of your research. But I'm just wondering about what is that impact that happens for you when you are pre-COVID out in the world, out in these spaces, that the natural world. I put this in quotes because, like, I don't know, they say there's no part of the world that hasn't been touched by humans now or something.
Yeah, it is partly research, I guess, because I don't know if other artists feel like that, but I feel like I'm always working. I'm always looking at stuff and wondering about it. And I'm a big reader, so I've been reading actually too many nonfiction books about the devastation of nature. I'm actually at the point where I feel like I just need a book of Larson cartoons or something to cheer me up. but I've read a lot about glaciers, and that's a series that I've been working on. I did a series of embroidered glaciers that look like they're bleeding, and this year I've done a series of black glaciers. When the forest fires, you know, the smoke blows around, the soot lands on the glaciers, which makes them dark, which makes them melt faster. And as they disappear, the what's the word, downriver consequences are going to be quite grim for agriculture and drinking water and all those things. So it's sort of a combination of things, both sort of being out there, and I've been a weather freak for quite a while, so I'm always paying attention to what the weather's doing, but I also try and, you know, photograph the lichens on things, or try to keep track of new plants that I see. I guess because of getting older, I don't remember things as well, so I have to write them down to remember them. I have started embroidering a series of little flowers that I put in clamshell containers, like when you buy peanuts or stuff in a deli, it comes in a little clamshell container. So I've got all these packaged wildflowers, and it's all grist for the mill. I feel like I'm always working. I'm constantly photographing things when I'm out there, or drawing things. So it is kind of research.
And when you come across these, you're talking about these bits, these buckles, all these signs of human activity, you know, what kind of state does that put you in? Are you like, I know you incorporate some of that stuff into your work. So on one hand, you might say, oh, this will work. But I mean, are you sort of forlorn about the state that we're leaving our pathways, or off the beaten pathways?
I'm super forlorn. I read recently we're losing 150 species a day. I remember quite a long time ago reading that there are PCBs in Inuit women's breast milk, stuff like that, that just, I think another thing about getting older is I feel quite impotent. You know, I don't know that I have that righteous anger that a young person has, because I almost feel like I can control what I do, but I feel like the world is just sort of mushrooming in its own way. But I do feel grateful to have an art practice, because I can sort of describe what I'm thinking about through my work. And also with the things with the backpacks, I like the idea of, it's almost like I'm proposing that we carry the world rather than tread on it.
And then there's this delicacy in the embroidery. So, you know, it's like they're beautiful objects, right? And so there's something about that vacillation between the, you know, what's left behind, the traces of human trampling, and the beauty of what how you transform these. I mean, they are aesthetically beautiful objects as well. You're curious of aesthetically beautiful. So is that a space you like to play in? That, or
Well,
you can't help make them beautiful. Embroidery is beautiful.
I think all of us on the panel as artists, you know, have a real fondness for our materials and for aesthetics. I see embroidery, the opulence of the material, is sort of the perfect way to describe the natural world, because I see the natural world as the most opulent thing. If you look at like a little tiny red mushroom, it's just like the most amazing, beautiful thing you've ever seen. So the materials and the quality of embroidery is kind of bait in a way to get people to come and look closer at things.
Right.
Because far away they can see, oh, well, it's a landscape, or, oh, well, it's a bunch of rocks or something. But then when they get closer, it's like, oh. So I think I'm always trying to pull people in with something that has color and texture. And then often, I can hear, that's one thing that's really great about the culture crawl, is people that aren't looking for you find you, and then they stand around and talk about your work, and you can kind of be the fly on the wall and see how they're responding or answer their questions.
And it's another point of entry too for some people who are maybe there just for technique too. Might just be there to enjoy the craft of it as well.
Yeah.
Kat, I wanted, if I can, dig a little deeper into some of you talked about some, the early difficulties of finding yourself in a new place. And I guess I'm really interested in this notion of new place, feeling out of place. Can you track yourself back to what it was like? What was your feeling of, like, what was the challenge of being in a new space at a formative age? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say that the immigrant experience is hard. You're leaving your country, you're leaving your family, your culture, and then you're stuck in the middle of this land that there's snow, like the snow. That's something I never saw snow, and the coldness and the harshness, and also the beauty of our sunsets, and the isolation, and it's quite a shift. Like coming from Chile, where being around family is a big thing, being sociable, dancing, and then you go to a place where it's really isolated and you can't connect with people, the language barrier, culture barrier. So it was definitely a very hard transition, I would say. It was definitely not easy.
And when I look at that last painting of very much an ocean, sky, mostly sky feeling, I can't help think about the fact that is also the Saskatchewan skyline, is it not? It's a small strip of land and then majority sky, which can be quite agoraphobic if it's a lot. It's fairly big. Does that resonate with you?
Well, I totally agree with you, because all your experiences do get embedded in your work, whether you know it or not. Like I'm from Chile, around water, always water being very important, and then Saskatchewan, the land being flat, and the vastness of the sunset can go forever, like forever. So it's definitely it's in the work.
Definitely, I totally see it. Yeah. And so, how do you feel now that you've put so much of those very difficult feelings into your work? You've used that as a vehicle for your creative expression. How do you feel about Saskatchewan? I guess I want to know. That land, that big sky. Are you done with that? Are you glad to be back on the coast?
Well, I think that nothing happens nothing's an accident. So we were meant to be there, and I was meant to go through the experience. Like, I'm a strong believer that the things that we go through are whether good or bad, are there to get you somewhere, to lead you somewhere. So the work that I do is that was birthed from that experience. So if I had not had the experience, the way I worked and the way that I paint, and that wouldn't exist at all.
And talk about your choice to work on the floor.
Well, for me, working on the floor is a way to ground myself, to connect to the earth, and also to find a balance between the physical and the emotional part. So I always tell people, like, I see painting for me, it's like a dancer. A dancer is moving physically and connecting with the music, which is also the emotional. So they're not separate, they're one. So when I'm painting, that's what I feel. So I can start at one end of the studio and end up on the other end, because I'm slowly kind of moving with the canvas, moving around, and I kind of move with it. So it's constantly moving. So it's very physical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's this idea that you're rejecting the traditional vertical too. It's like you're letting go of all the traditions of painting. I see a lot for you, a lot about letting go, and letting go is kind of like letting the paint, letting the materials tell you where you're going to go, sort of surrendering to the materials. Does that?
Yeah, surrendering to the act itself, being in the moment, and just letting the present reveal itself to you rather than you controlling it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating. And so, how big do you work? Do you work on a large scale?
Yeah, I do.
The floor is big.
Yeah, it is. I have done a painting 4 feet by 4, and then I had another one 5 feet by 6. So working in bigger sizes to me would be the best way, because I can definitely expand my movement even more, which for me, that's very more comforting, that I can move my body in a bigger space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, I'm going to ask Megan about the size of your works that you're doing. Just I know it seems like nuts and bolts, but I'm interested in the dimensions that people select. And so I'm just wondering if now that you're doing these fire followers, which is like sort of a bigger and outside kind of a subject matter, has the scale of your work changed at all?
It's kind of a medium for that showing how it's kind of medium scale. I used to work very small, like I'm known for working super, super tiny. I have the tiniest brushes you've ever seen. I don't know how I still have my eyesight. This stuff is quite new from last year. This is the first time that I was like, I'm going to work big. But a lot of times before that, I was working like super tiny, and people would see my work online and expect it to be that big. And then they'd come into my studio and see it was this big. And they're like, how do you even paint on like the eyelashes when it's like a pin size? So I'm
how big would these ones be?
So, I mean, the one in the middle, of course, is that big one, but the two on the sides, those were actually what I would have considered large before. I think the fox one was maybe like this big, and that was what I considered. I did a big painting, and people are like, no, that's still small. I'm like, yeah, but compared to my like this size. So I'm definitely playing around with different sizes and seeing what feels the best for each piece. And it's definitely, it's nice working big and still getting to do like my fine detail that I love to do, but then having more freedom to really do big strokes and big splashes and be a bit more free with my work. Whereas when you work super tiny, you can't really get those big expressive strokes. Everything is very much like this. So
yeah, but I can see that working really small is also a kind of a going into a different world too. This world of the miniature, right? That can be a whole other territory that you have to give up when you're working big. So you can see a little bit of both of that. So I know that you do that you have an Etsy page and you sell your work. Do you ever feel that it's very tempting to kind of give people what they want, or do you find that you just keep doing what you want, and if people like them, that's the way it is?
Yeah, that's usually what I do. I think if I'm going to just do what other people want, then I might as well just not be doing this. But I find that if you can do what you want and do it really well and really put everything into it, then you're going to find the right people that want exactly what you're doing. So I just try to focus on that and just do whatever I feel I'm drawn to.
And again, I feel like I'm not sure if I'm looking at sometimes a fable or a fairy tale or a dystopian, a kind of a view of the world, the nature as it's going to happen. Do you get any of that reaction from other people, like when you show your work?
Yeah, I think it's interesting seeing people's different reactions to my work, and I wonder if that almost says something about them. So somebody might look at some of my work and say, oh, this is really dark, and then other people are like, this is really beautiful. So it depends. The same image can kind of frighten people, and then somebody else might see it as very pretty and calming and beautiful and poetic.
So I'm really noticing that with all three artists here, that there is something heavy in there, but there's also something definitely aesthetically pleasing. So it's that little balance there that's probably keeps you engaged in your work.
I think that's what makes the stories more interesting as well. If it was just a pretty picture, you might not look at it twice. But if I have a piece that has like pretty pastel, colorful candies, that colors that draw you in, and then you get closer and you realize, oh, this is very ominous, it kind of, then you don't know how to feel about it. You're like, I feel conflicted in my feelings towards this work, and that's a bit more interesting maybe.
So I noticed we have a question, and I thought I might check it out. This is from Andrea Gonzalez. Kat, do you think that colors have changed with your evolution through the years?
Yes, they definitely have. As I mentioned before, like I started with really dark reds, dark blues, very dark colors. And as I've evolved, the colors have been getting lighter and lighter. So it's definitely changed. So I think it's just a reflection of the journey that I've had.
So how would that translate? Colors getting lighter, meaning?
Less weight. Like, it's not like I consciously picked those colors. It's just I was attracted to them. And then now I'm not attracted to those deep colors anymore. I'm attracted to like the blues. So I think it's everything's intuitive. So I'm not picking, I'm just attracted to it. So I'm just going with, and it's following the way I've healed. So it's just mirroring it.
So what happens if you're fully healed? Then what do you do?
Well, I don't think that's ever going to happen, because I think we're all onions and there's layers and layers and layers. So I have tons of things I can get creativity from. Like that's going to be evolving for me until I leave. Like that's something that's going to be continuous, and then you continuously evolve.
And for such personally invested, emotionally invested work, do you ever worry that other people might read it wrong, or do you think you might ever take offense at something that's so deeply rooted in something that's so deeply personal?
Well, for me, like when I did my show in Saskatchewan, and all my work was really dark, and I've ever heard people coming into the space and saying it's too aggressive, or it's too harsh. But then the people that came in that really connected with the work, with people were on their healing journey, like they've had experienced something really painful, and it connected to them. And that is what's important, is connecting with your tribe, not with the world, your tribe.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was mentioning at the top of this talk, is that this ability to express yourself creatively can lead to connection, and connection, I think, is kind of leads to a social resilience. Does everybody kind of see that way?
I agree in that.
Bettina?
Yeah, I think even though maybe Megan and I work in a more slow and controlled manner, for myself, I always keep working on something, because as much as I think it through and lay it out, it never turns out how I thought it would. And that's part of what keeps me going. And also, you can send something out in the world and you can't control the meaning. I put the ingredients in for the things I'm thinking about, but then when I send it out, I like hearing how people receive it, because it's sometimes not what I imagined.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have thoughts on that?
I think maybe like you put your own story into it, but then getting other people to have their own story to the piece, it almost adds to the piece and it like creates this bigger thing. And I think it's better to let people have their own interpretation and put their own experiences into what they see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I know that there has been many critiques of my work where I felt like I just wanted to curl up and die, because I early in school, where I thought this is kind of like taking all your clothes off and saying, so what do you think? Okay, tell me the truth. But I guess that's the bravery part. That's the and I guess that's what I'm thinking about with this traversing sensitive territory. It takes a bit of guts to put yourself out there. And I think, as Bettina was saying, like once it's done, let it go. Is that important? Bettina, did I get that right?
Yeah, people bring their own stories to what they see. You just can't corner it. And also, sometimes from people's comments, you do realize that you're missing the mark somehow, and that's valuable too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would think that would be valuable, to not care at all what the feedback is. I mean, don't let it kill you, but yeah, that's got to be part of the piece, right? That's part of the connection.
Something to work on. I mean, there's always, everything I make, I find fault with it. So there's always something to keep working at.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So we just have a few minutes left. So I thought I'd give each of you an opportunity to just let me know, or not me, the viewers, listeners. I don't know what Zoom people are. What's coming up for you? Like is there something happening in the crawl, or is there future exhibit, online exhibit? Some work to be seen?
Well, for me, I'm just, this COVID experience has definitely pushed me to talk about my work, and in a place where I've never done before, because I've never signed up for artist talks. And then because all this is happening, I was like, you know what, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? Might as well just do it. And then you do it, and then you realize, okay, it's not so scary. So I definitely feel like this culture experience, even though it's like a COVID crawl, there's so many benefits from being in it and learning. And I definitely feel I'm going to be taking it to next year, and it's definitely going to be going somewhere else.
Fantastic. That's great. Resilience despite COVID. Anyone else?
I guess I'll go. I mean, I've talked about it a lot, but the forest fire exhibit, Fire Followers, that's my next upcoming thing. We're hoping to get it up by the end of this month. It was actually supposed to go up in the spring, right as COVID hit. So it's all been delayed, but now it's gonna go up soon, and it'll be up until fall of next year. So there'll be plenty of chances to see it throughout the year. And then for Crawl itself, we're going to have very limited visits to, not in our studios right here, but we've got a gallery area at our studio at the Arts Factory where people can come and safely see some of our work. So if people do want to come see work in person, they can. And if not, there's so many options to see people's studios online at the Crawl, which is really cool this year, of the 360 views of spaces. So even as an artist now, I'm like, I can see other people's studios.
Everybody cleaned up.
Yeah.
Ish, yeah, right. Bettina, are you showing any work in the Crawl, or are you hunkering down?
I have a piece of a glacier that's in the Italian Cultural Center right now on Grandview. That's part of a curated show from the Craft Council of BC. And I will have my studio open during the crawl. It's the Eastside Atelier. You have to sign up, register online to come into the studios, and it's all restricted as to how many people are allowed in each studio, and the time is limited too. But I have embroidered landscapes, and I have some experimental work. So there's a range of stuff.
Great. So all you need is some pre-planning and a friend. Just book some time.
An umbrella.
An umbrella. Well, this weekend should be good. Anyway, that's it. I'm so pleased that you were able to make this. And yeah, I'm grateful that you shared so much of your work about traversing sensitive territory. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carlyn.
And before we go, I want to thank you, Carlin, Bettina, Kat, and Megan. It truly was a moving conversation that has traversed many, many journeys. I have to say I've really enjoyed all three conversations. They've all been incredibly illuminating in many different ways as they maneuvered around the various challenges that we've all are experiencing in this really unprecedented time with the pandemic. I think it also speaks to the impact that the arts has for growth and introspection, healing, and moving forward. And each of you have contributed a little bit of that in your conversations. So what I have to say is that what we've heard through these conversations truly does attest to creative resilience. And I thank you all for sharing your stories. I'm hoping those of you who are tuning in will come and visit some of the studios, including the three artists who are here today. You can either visit them in person or virtually. For details, you can go to culturecrawl.ca. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and thanks for joining us. Good night.
Good night.
Yeah.
Bye.